I'm always on the search for books that do not revolve around romance. And it is very hard to find in Christian fiction.
Yeah. There's a lot of it.
There's a lot of it.
Do you think it's because it's like just as people, the thing that we all want is love, like just unconditional love?
I think. But sometimes I think romance is just the easy way out. I mean, throw a romance in there, and that's an easy way to
get readers.
That's almost like an easy, cheap way to tell a story. It takes a lot more skill
to write a different type of story.
Write a book that doesn't, I hate to say it because I know there's a lot of people, romance in a story is a crutch that authors use to, now that's just my opinion. And I'm not invalidating because there is a huge market for romance. And
I love a good romance novel.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I have read so many stories that were fantastic. And I'm like, okay, this would have been just as good a book if you had taken out the romance. So I don't know. For me, sometimes I feel like romance is a crutch just because it's easy.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'll get crucified for saying
that. I don't even know. But I think for women, women want to be pursued. And so maybe that's why there is such a market for it amongst female readers.
Welcome to the Bookish Introverts podcast. Join host Amazon bestselling author Brett Nelson and avid reader Melanie Dyer as they dive in to review books they've read, then chat with the amazing authors behind them. Quiet minds, big bookshelves. You don't want to miss it.
So we were talking about how Annie was getting worse.
Yes.
And they're trying to figure out all these things. And so Reese is invested, but I definitely get the vibe through the whole thing that like he's struggling against that. Like he's pulling against, he's concerned for her. He wants to know more. But then he doesn't.
Yeah.
Because he just kind of leery of getting drawn back in. And then right after she goes to the hospital, do you remember that part where he flies out to some conference and it talks about his disguise?
Yes. And then, and then that Dr. Sal was there.
And I was so confused.
I didn't understand the point of that.
Okay. So I finally figured it out later. Like I had to kind of go back and reread that. So he was trying to state, because we learned Reese did go on to become a heart surgeon.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to stay up on his skills is what that is. He's like going for continuing education.
Okay.
And
at this point he
has removed himself after this big event, this big tragedy. And he hasn't been practicing. And so
he doesn't want people to know that he's him. Yes.
And did you catch that in that chapter when they're talking
because he's basically abandoned his career.
Yeah. He's just
in his grief.
He's completely gone off grid.
Yes.
And so I thought that was interesting. Like, I mean, obviously he had the resources to be able to do that, but like even his former partner doesn't know where he is.
No. Yeah.
And so it was like,
and his former partner does show up at the end.
Yeah.
He winds up being integral to the story. Yeah.
So I was like, because when I got to that chapter, I was like, what is happening here? Like, why are you incognito? What?
Yeah.
But then later it became clear, and I was like, oh, he was at a conference getting continuing education. He just didn't want anybody to recognize him.
I didn't make that connection, so that makes perfect sense.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that also kind of helped me figure out like why he was the way he was when he would, because later we learned that Cindy, Annie's niece, asks him, they become friends. Like she figures out, okay, I can trust this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so because he's drawn to Annie, even though against this part of him that's fighting against it, he continues to interact with them and like they become friends. And so Cindy asks him to drive them to a doctor's appointment, and it turns out that her doctor is his former partner.
Is Dr. Royer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I thought, because immediately when you hear him ask who her doctor is and she says that name and it's like,
well, and he wouldn't even go in.
Reese just has a visceral reaction to it and it's like, oh, he knows him somehow.
Yeah.
And so my thought immediately was like, oh, this is the doctor that operated on Emma and he lost her.
Yes.
Which we learned later is not what happened.
It's not what happened. Yeah.
I was like, man. So I loved kind of the intertwining of all the characters because it's almost like they're peripherally connected. Some of them fully intertwined, but a lot of them just peripherally interconnected. And it felt very organic.
Yes. Yeah.
Like not forced. Like he wasn't trying to find ways to make it all connect. It seemed like it just kind of worked itself out.
It worked. Yeah.
It works as an author. Like, do you find that in your books that your characters?
I mean, that's what I hope readers experience when they read it. But I will say, some writers can't pull it off.
Sometimes I feel like it's very forced.
Yes. Sometimes it comes across as very forced, and you can tell that the author, it takes a lot of skill to do what he did in this book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved that part of it. I thought it was really good, very well done, that they were so the connections were appropriate, I guess is the way to say it.
Yes. Yeah.
So he takes him to that first appointment, and like you said, he won't even go in. He just stays in the car.
Yeah.
And then he goes another time with him, and he's like incognito a little bit with a cap, and he's grown a beard. Like we figure out that he's grown a beard. And
yeah. Now I can't remember what the first time he took them. Was that, because Royer kind of leans down and talks to him for a little bit or looks at him, and you kind of get the feeling that Royer recognized
he's eyeballing him.
Was it the first time?
No, I think it's the second time.
Okay, that's the second time. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you could read the tension in Reese when Royer came out and was talking to them. Like he didn't tell the reader, but he did a very good job of writing that tension in Reese. Yeah.
So, through all of this, there are just really some nice day-to-day moments of like him and Charlie restoring the boat and all these things that they're working on together. And I love that he interspersed some of the heavier stuff with those just lighter moments of day-to-day living.
General day-to-day living.
I really found that part. I needed those moments, I guess, as I was reading along.
Yeah. Well, that's how you get to know them in their day-to-day life. Now, a book would be boring if that's all it was, but I think you need that to get to
kind of flesh the characters out.
Yeah, yeah, to get to the meat of what these people are and what they believe and what they stand for, and
yeah. So, kind of in that section, we're learning more like about Reese and Emma's past together. And then we kind of figure out that he felt real protective of her, and then how that they grow into kind of loving one another. And like he's so devoted to her that his whole life, kind of the whole path of his life is about fixing her at this point.
Yeah, that's his whole goal in life.
Yeah, is to fix Emma's heart. And then we get kind of glimpses of like there was something traumatic with her death. With Emma's death.
Yes, there was.
But he's not real clear. It's not real clear. It's still kind of left.
Yes, you don't know until pretty close to the end.
Yeah, how that went down.
How it all went down.
So we kind of move on, and Reese talks about like when they were swimming that time and Emma started her cycle, and like Charlie thought she was dying.
He thought she was dying.
And scared her mom to death, like telling her that she was dying. And her mom comes running down and she's like, no. But I love that, like, even into that, like, because most young boys would be really put off by that.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And, kind of like, I don't want to.
But then again, Reese is studying hearts. Has been studying hearts for, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I love that part. And I had that, like, written down that, like, there's that quote where he says, "That night, I dug into my books and spent hours reading about women's bodies and the way things worked. Emma didn't look like those pictures, but I knew that in order to fix her, in order for her to live, I had to get past all of that." And, like, as a mom to a boy that is someday going to have a wife, I was like, man, I hope that I can raise him in a way that he is that compassionate. Like, because that had to, like, and I feel like we see that throughout the rest of the story of their relationship. Like, he was a caring boyfriend and then later spouse. I mean, obviously his kind of whole world. I felt like it was almost to a point a little obsessive.
Yes, it was.
In an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
And I think he realizes that later on.
He does, yeah.
But also just that devotion and that willingness to confront uncomfortable topics so that he could be there for her in the way that she needed.
Well, and we'll talk about more when we get there, but his obsession was kind of instrumental in her demise.
The way things went down.
Yeah.
It took me forever to catch on.
Yeah, it did. And that's what I said.
I was so shocked when that came. I was like,
yeah.
Because I would have never.
No.
Like, you just assumed that, like, it was the condition.
Yeah.
But there was a mitigating factor. He sees her chart.
Yes.
And he's fighting against this urge to, like, read it.
Yes.
But he could also get in big trouble if he got caught with it.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and I don't think he does on that one. And then right after that is actually where that part happens where they donate blood to Emma. And we learn about the dump trucks, which I thought was so sweet.
Yeah.
And then, when you talked about how he was disappointed in the books because they were sterile.
Yeah.
Right after that is where he kind of, that flashback talks about that. And Emma tells him that each heart has two parts. The part that is it the part that pumps and the part that loves. Is that how she says it?
Yeah.
And I thought that was so profound, like, because our hearts are these mechanical things. And I also found that really interesting how he did, because he takes the time at different points to describe how the heart functions.
Yes.
And so, like, but he puts it in layperson's terms, so it's very easy for us to understand.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it
didn't feel like out of reach or like,
yeah,
I don't understand that. Like, it was very much in a way that me, as just an individual off the street with no medical background, I could totally understand what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated that, because it also kind of just gave me a greater, like, awe, I guess, of how the Lord put our bodies together. How intricately he fashioned us.
It does help you to see the miracle of what our bodies are.
It's crazy. Like, we're walking around in these things that are really complex.
Yes.
So you'll never be able to convince me that there's not a creator.
Exactly.
You know,
how can you think all of this happened because of a big boom? A big
Yes. I liked that part of it.
Yeah. A lot of people didn't, though.
Yeah.
In the reviews, a lot of people, the rowing, they didn't like all the rowing
references,
scenes, and and a lot of the transplant stuff, and just him learning. Yeah, a lot of them didn't like all that. I'm like, that was one of my favorite
integral
parts.
To the story.
It was.
And rowing for him, like, that's his outlet. That's what I saw it as. It's like, that's what he goes to do when he just needs a moment or doesn't want to think. He just wants to let his body burn off some of whatever's happening up here.
I used to be an avid runner, and I know this is crazy. Some of my most prayerful times of spending time with the Lord was when I was running.
Yeah,
because I don't know what it is about running, or and I'm not.
Do
one
you
of
think
those,
it's that it quiets the mental, like the mental noise?
I think so. And I don't know why, because like, I've gone to the gym before. Going to the gym does not affect me that way. Yeah, like running on the treadmill, it doesn't. But just being outside and running, and like, I can understand why, because I could see how the same thing would happen when you're rowing. Yeah, because you're out in nature, it's quiet.
Well, and they're both very cardio.
You're away from people.
Exercises.
Exactly.
I wonder if that has something to do with it.
It may have something to do with it.
This might get kind of out into woo-woo territory, but those activities that you do that have such an impact on your heart, does that somehow connect you to the creator of that heart?
Possibly. I mean, I've never thought about it like that, but yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I could totally see how I loved that part of the story, but,
I enjoyed
but
it
maybe
too.
It was because I connected to it, that I don't run anymore because I'm old and tired.
I don't run because I don't like to run. I will say, though, I have recently, since last time I was here, started kind of my own, like, I'm going to get myself healthier journey. So this morning, Brett is so kind, and like, when we do podcasts, he always has a drink for us. Last time I was like, fully leaded Coke. I want the real thing.
Yeah.
But in the last month, since I've been here with you, I have switched to diet, trying to cut those calories back, and it's working. It's helping. But I'm just like, my husband yesterday was like, okay, we need to start adding in some more physical activity, and I was like, don't like that.
Yeah, let's not jump to any conclusions.
I know that I have to, and I'm going to, but it's probably going to start with walking. I don't think I'll start running.
Yeah. Well, and it does take a while to work your way up to it. There was a time when I could run 9-10 miles without stopping.
Holy cow, Brett.
I used to run 25 miles a day.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
No, I'm not doing that. I did Couch to 5K, like, right after I had Stella.
Oh, yeah.
And so I completed that program and could run 5K, like, without stopping. And then once I completed it, I was like, okay, I'm done.
I'm done. I accomplished it.
I only ran a 5K like twice, and I was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm done with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I don't know why, but yeah, and maybe it is what you said, but I felt the closest to God when I was running. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why. I can't explain it.
I would be curious to know if other Christians that are into, like, those types of activities feel the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I would be, if anyone out there wants to chip in on that,
listeners,
let us know.
Do you run or row or do any of those types of things?
But like I said, it was not the same in the gym. And I think it was because in the gym, you're in a building and you're around people. When you're out running, you're by yourself. You're not around people.
Well, and you're in nature.
And you're in nature.
That's another connection to the
God
creator.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Because
That's
the Bible says that he makes himself known to us through nature. I think it's in Romans.
You know, my dad and Barrett both, like, they're super into hunting and they love it.
Mm-hmm.
And Barrett says that. He's like, Mom, I just feel like I'm closer to the Lord when I'm out in the in the woods. And my dad has said that for years. Like, that is his place to be.
Yeah. So there's something to it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. If you want to feel closer to God, get out in nature.
So is that my sign that I should go ahead and plant that garden this spring and
I think so.
Get myself outside?
I think you need to do it.
I think I probably
Although we live in the South, it's too hot to be outside in the summer.
Well, that's why I said the spring.
Yeah.
Once it gets too hot, all that stuff can just die. And then we'll
go back to being a couch potato.
That's right. So then they again go to the well for another meal. That seems to be like their weekly thing.
Yeah, they go every week. Mm-hmm.
Fridays for their meal.
Yeah.
And I loved it. The second time they go, they meet Termite. Listen, did
Termite
you die?
It's fantastic.
Because his whole name is Termitus, and then they call him Termite. Cain. Yeah. Termitus. Who would name their child that?
I don't know.
I almost think that he has to like know somebody who named someone that, or someone that has.
That's too random.
That is the wildest thing.
Yeah, it's hilarious. And Termite, he actually winds up having a pretty significant role in the book.
Yeah,
and he's just a rough-edged redneck.
Yeah, he's a 16-year-old boy that like obviously he's on hard times, and we learn as they get to know him that like he doesn't really have any family that he can depend on. He comes from a really rough background.
Yeah,
but he makes friends with Davis and with Reese and Charlie at the well.
Yeah.
And so,
although he doesn't really like them
at first he thinks that there's something very different about them.
he thinks they have a special relationship with each other.
He's like, I am not into that.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, I like Termite.
I like Termite too. And I love that like Reese puts him onto that job. Like he asks him if he has any special skills, and the kid, he rides a motorcycle, right? Is that what it is?
Yes.
And he asks him if he built it, and he's like, yeah. And so they learn that like Termite has a really big skill with engines.
Yes.
And so he puts him onto a job at a marina fixing boat engines, or like jet skis and things.
And I really, Termite, these Reese and Charlie and Davis, they were very good for Termite because Termite was not a people person.
No, he was struggling.
Yeah, he was and
rough around the edges.
Yeah, and I loved the way again, it was kind of a God moment in his life because your circle matters.
And man, I've seen that happen so many times, like where the Lord just brings someone along at the right time. Even in my own life of like, I needed that person.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just for a season and sometimes it's long term.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a moment.
Yeah.
Just a quick little moment. But the Lord knows what we need when we need it. And he always has the right people there if our hearts and eyes are open to see it.
Yes. And willing to
receive it
and to receive it. Yeah.
So he leaves the well, Reese does, and he goes to the hospital, and that's where he puts on that doctor's coat and pretends to be a doctor, and he reads her chart. He takes it to the bathroom and he reads Annie's chart.
Yes.
And because at that point I was like, oh, you're in it now.
Now, how old was he at that point?
Well, this is in present time, so he's grown.
Oh, so okay.
Because he snuck in to read Annie's chart.
I'm thinking of Annie. See, I had trouble during this whole book
with the back and forth.
Keeping the back and forth because I was telling Charlie, I said, we can't talk about this too much because I want to save it for the podcast. But in the book, there's no clear delineation did we already talk about this? There's no clear delineation in the book between present and the flashbacks.
No, we didn't really talk about that. Well, just other than to say that you found it kind of difficult to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
the delineation is you have to keep your character straight.
You have to keep your character straight. And there were times when, you'd be in the timeline, in the present timeline with Annie and with Reese. And then all of a sudden you're like Emma's name pops up and you're like, oh, we're back in the past.
Yeah.
So like
really the only delineation you get would be like either it would be a new paragraph, like a new section, or a new chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was a little confusing when they were mid-chapter and you're just getting a new paragraph.
And it happened mid-chapter, and these days that is kind of a trend, and I hate this trend of, this chapter is from the POV of Bob, and then the next chapter is from the POV.
Characters.
Yeah, and every chapter is dedicated to the POV, the point of view of. I hate that trend. I don't
Do you
remember
not like the
books.
multiple points of view, or you just don't like that it's alternating chapters?
I think it's just that it's alternating chapters. I don't remember books being like that when I was, like,
I don't remember reading very many books when I was younger that had multiple POVs.
I think that's a new trend, because I know in some of the writers conferences I've been to, they drill that into your head. Pick up a POV and stick
and
with
stick
it.
to it.
Now, I do trend to write in third person omniscient, to where you're kind of in the mind of
Your main character.
each of the characters. Like, but you can write it in a way that it's clear to the reader, so, but in his books, I felt like it was very jarring, because there were several times when I had to back up and be like, oh, well, we're in a totally different, time period. And I would have to back up and start reading again and get my mind out of the present time and into the flashback.
I don't know that I struggled with it so much like that, but I also was once I figured out that this was going to be a deeper read, like that the subject matter was going to be a little deeper than I initially thought.
Deep reads.
Oh, I do too.
I love them.
And this kind of, this delves into some really deep topics.
It does. Yeah.
And so once I kind of figured that out, I was very careful from that point to make sure that I was reading when I was not distracted.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't trying to multitask. I was reading just to read.
Yeah.
But I also, in a different way, like when we read our first novel together and we were doing the podcast, I had kind of asked you before, like, how do I need to read?
Yeah.
And this time I kind of went into it with that thought, but I got so invested in this story that I didn't necessarily read it with that intent, because I was just invested in the characters this time in a way that I wasn't. I liked our first book that we read, but I think I was more invested in this story.
Yeah. The last book was a very heavy, emotionally heavy read.
It was,
but this book is also an emotionally heavy read, but in a totally different way. But again, the female author with the Cynthia Rushdie book
versus
male author.
I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
In the perspective and in the way that they wrote it, because to me the themes were very similar.
They were very similar.
Grief, loss, illness, disappointment, like all these things, even addiction to a point, which we didn't discover till later. All these things that are happening, trauma. But just they were very different in feel.
Yeah, they were. And I think it was because
thought about that, but I think you're right. I think it is the difference in a female author and a male author.
Yeah.
And because even, the Bible's clear about that male and female, we were made differently to complement one another.
Yes.
But differently.
And
so we perceive and feel and interact with the world differently.
And this is why I wish there were more male authors in Christian fiction. Christian fiction is dominated
by
females. And I'm glad there are great female authors out there.
But this was such it was refreshing.
Yeah.
I think because of that different perspective. And so I think it's great that you're writing
different tone.
And that he's, yes. And so, yes, I agree. There should be more.
Yeah.
Maybe the Lord will raise up more.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah. There's a readers group that I'm in on Facebook. It's a Christian fiction readers group. And every book that they talk about, literally 99% of the books they talk about is female authors. And again, I think it's because most of the readers in Christian fiction are probably female. But I'm like, I wish there were more.
But I don't know. This drew me in a way that, like, I think female authors maybe don't. And maybe it is the difference in the tone. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I'm definitely already like plotting my next Martin book to read.
So yeah.
I liked it, but like you said earlier, he kind of gave you like a Nicholas Sparks type feel.
Yeah.
And I think the setting has a lot to do with that, but also the tone, and maybe it is the difference.
Although or at least on this one, I can't speak for all of them because this is the only one of Charles Martin's I've read, but Nicholas Sparks gravitates more to romance, where in this one, Charles Martin really didn't.
No.
Which I liked.
It's
there, but it's very subtle.
Yes. And
it's not the main focus of the story.
You can even tell, though, that like as the story progresses, Reese kind of starts to develop some feelings for Cindy, Annie's aunt. And he's, again, combating that.
I kept waiting for that to happen because in books, that's always
I think it's a given. Like, I think the way this book ended, it's a given that it was going to.
Yeah.
But I kind of love that he just kind of left it.
I do too.
Where it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you can kind of draw your own conclusions as a reader.
Because I'm always on the search for books that do not involve around, or that don't revolve around romance. And it wasn't very hard to find in Christian fiction.
Yeah. There is a lot of it.
There's a lot of it.
Do you think it's because it's like, just as people, the thing that we all want is love, like just unconditional love?
I think. But sometimes I think romance is just the easy way out. I mean, throw a romance in there, and that's an easy way to
get readers.
That's almost like an easy, cheap way to tell a story. It takes a lot more skill
to write a different type of story.
Write a book that doesn't. I hate to say it because I know there's a lot of people. Romance in a story is a crutch that authors use to. Okay. Now that's just my opinion. And I'm not invalidating because there is a huge market for romance, and
I love a good romance novel.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I just tend to feel like I have read so many stories that were fantastic. And I'm like, okay, this would have been just as good a book if you had taken out the romance.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I don't know. For me, sometimes I feel like romance is a crutch just because it's easy.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know.
I'll get crucified for saying that.
I don't even know. But I think for women, women want to be pursued. And so maybe that's why why there is such a market for it amongst female readers.
True.
Because we love that. I think everybody, if you've fallen in love before, you've had a relationship, that new love high or whatever.
Yes.
Everybody's always chasing that, I feel like. And in our culture, it's so easy now.
Oh, yeah.
It's not biblical at all.
No, it's not biblical
because what I always tell my kids, it's like, love is a choice. It's like, yeah, when you first meet someone and are interested in them, there's all those wonderful feelings of the new relationship.
Yeah,
and stuff.
The butterflies
and all of that. That's great, but that's not what real love is. Like,
that eventually goes away.
Yes.
I mean, to an extent, that kind of takes a background to the real relationship at some point.
My husband and I have been married. Our anniversary is next month. We'll be married for 18 years. We were babies when we got married.
That's unreal.
Yeah, because I was 18 and he was 20. Like, we were super young. And I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone, but it worked out for us, and so I'm thankful.
Yeah,
because in ways we got to grow up together, right? And and I think in a lot of ways that has caused us to grow closer to one another. But back to what you were saying, like how that kind of goes away. Like, that newlywed phase is great and wonderful, but then at some point you just start living life, and like you're building a life together.
Yeah.
And there are some days that, like, I know he wakes up and he looks at me and he's like, that girl is straight up annoying. Because there are some days I wake up and look at him and I'm just like, ugh, go to work.
That's why you need go to work. Yeah. That's why you need something deeper than the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, because
you're never going to make it if you don't have something deeper than that.
Even on the days that I feel like that, like, he's still my best friend and I choose to love him.
Like, exactly.
I have to choose. I have to choose to love him because he's just a human.
Because he's imperfect. Just a human,
and he still has to choose to love me. I have my days where I am less than easy to live with. And thank God he still chooses me. But I think that's one of the things I try to teach my kids right now is, like, as they're growing up, I want them to understand, like, yeah, you're going to probably meet someone someday and, like, have all these big emotions and feelings and fall in love. But you're going to have to choose to stay in love.
Yes.
And to stay committed to that person for the rest of your life, if that's who you choose that you want to do your life with. And I loved that, like, in this book, he kind of hits on that, like, even through all the hard things, it would have been so easy for him to at some point walk away from Emma.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And nobody, I don't think, would have even faulted him. Emma probably wouldn't even have faulted him for it.
No.
Because that's a hard thing that she's dealing with. But I think this was a great picture of, like, Christ's love for us is, like, even when we're broken, even when things are less than perfect, he chooses us. And over we see Reese choosing Emma. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to write that relationship. Yeah. But it wasn't so in your face either that you're just like, ugh, all the mushy gushy.
Yeah.
It was just very I mean, I thought he wrote it in a very mature, deep, beautiful way.
Yes, all that gushy stuff. Sometimes I feel like it's just very superficial.
It can be.
It can be very superficial, and I think that's what I liked about it. This was not a superficial read in any way, shape, or form.
I don't know. I guess if I was expecting it to be to a point, because I didn't. I went into this with no preconceived notions whatsoever. Like, I have never read one of his books. I had never really heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
And so because like we talked about before, I tend to read more secular fiction than I do Christian fiction.
Yeah.
And so he's not someone that was really on my radar, but I have enjoyed every minute of this. He, like we had talked about how he looks at Annie's chart, pretends to be a doctor, reads Annie's chart, and then he leaves. So after that, we go to another flashback, and it was like when Reese took Emma rowing. So they go row, and he talks about just in that one, like, I think really all that I caught from that chapter in particular was how he was like describing her about how frail she was beginning to look, and he could tell that it was just her condition was taking a toll on her body.
Yes.
And she was young. I mean, they were teenagers at this point, so she still should have had a lot of life left to live.
She should have. Yeah.
And that was weighing on him. Like, I felt like every time we got to a flashback, there was always this sense of urgency of like Reese was just wanting to grow up so he could do what he was meant to do, to get the knowledge that he needed so that he could fix her.
Yes.
Like, there was always that urgency kind of driving it.
That was his life goal. Yeah. To fix her.
Yeah. So right after that was when they go to that healing revival. And then we move in back to the present day, and they're fixing that boat for the race.
Yes.
And like it talks about, it doesn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but you can tell they've been working on it for like a long time, and that these are expensive boats. I also did kind of go look into those a little bit. Did you do any research on that?
Mm-mm.
Those are crazy cool looking boats, but also like they are stupidly expensive.
Are they?
Yes. Yes. Like, I was like, who spends that kind of money on a boat? But
I guess if you're into it, yeah.
And if you're wealthy enough, whoever, you can spend your money on what you want to.
You've got the money to do it.
And then we learn that they have their own little boat that they've been working on that is theirs, that is not quite completely finished, but it is rowable. And so then he invites Cindy and Annie to go for a boat ride. And we learn that they also live on the lake, but that they had never really been out on it a whole lot because of their financial issues. They didn't really have the means for it, and also because of Annie's condition.
Her condition, yeah. You tend to wrap people in the proverbial bubble wrap when they're in a situation like that. Yeah.
And that kind of makes my heart hurt for the little girl,
because she misses out on so much because she's fragile.
Yeah.
You know, and as a caregiver, you want to protect the person that's fragile.
Can you imagine? Like, and I love that. Like, Cindy wasn't a character that we got a whole lot of insight or depth into, but she just was this solid presence throughout every interaction with Annie. Like, you can tell, like, she has lived her life for this little girl.
Yes.
Loving her as her own. And I liked her character, but to me, she was kind of a peripheral character.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like Charlie. They were both prominent characters in the story, but they were peripheral in a way. Yes.
They drive it at different times.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I like you were talking about different perspectives. I kind of would have liked to have maybe heard a little bit from her perspective, but at the same time, it was easier to focus on the main drive of the story because there wasn't the conflicting points of view.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah. And it could have, if he had focused too much on them, it really could have bogged the book down with too much detail. Because again, as a writer, I've read books where it was very bogged down and very, and it's like, it's a fine balance to give the information that they need to make it entertaining, but don't give it too much where you're like, okay, I'm going to skip ahead 4 pages because I'm tired of this.
Yeah. Can I confession? In my Bible reading study right now, I'm in Leviticus. And no, I'm in Numbers. Can I just tell you that there is totally some of that happening where I'm like, I don't care about all these names of these people from these clans.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely skimming right now some of those chapters.
All the begats.
Yes. Is that terrible of me?
No, because
like I am.
Most people that have read those chapters they've done that, or if they haven't, they're lying because
they're terrible.
Yeah.
Like, and those names are hard to pronounce.
They're hard to pronounce, and
They make my head hurt.
And I know there's a point to them all. Everybody's important, but yeah.
But why? Why do I need to know who begat who begat who begat who?
Yeah.
I've been skimming. If somebody has an answer to that, a legitimate answer, I would love to know.
Let us know. I mean,
Please.
Good record keeping on their part.
The first time I read through, like, from front to back, the Bible that way, I remember calling my dad and being like, okay, listen, I am so bogged down right here. Like, what is the purpose of this? in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers especially, like, I struggle with those because there are so just like, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my dad and he's like, he goes, really, the point of those chapters is to show us that we cannot do it on our own. That there's no way that we could be good enough on our own, that we have to have the Lord and that we have to have Jesus.
It points to the lineage of Jesus.
Yes. And I was like, okay. I mean, I guess if you're putting it that way, I'll continue on through the slog of the bog, but this is rough.
I'm saying skip over the 12 syllable names.
So I appreciate that there wasn't kind of the bogged down feel in this that can sometimes kind of create.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We kind of then move on. We flash back to their senior year of high school, and that's where we really learned that, like, Emma was super limited in what she could do because of her condition, and that was hard. She didn't want to be seen in a wheelchair, like, so they didn't get to do a lot of things. And then that's where she gives him the necklace that has that inscription on it.
It's a sandal.
No, the sandal is the one that Annie has around her neck.
Oh, okay. See, there are so much similarities in Annie and Emma. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What was hers? A triangle?
Yeah, it was just like a medallion. I think.
Medallion. Yeah.
And it has the quote,
the saying on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't write the quote down. Did you?
I think I did somewhere. I don't know if I can find it. Oh, let's see. Because he gave it to her in an apple orchard or something.
Yeah, she gave it to him in the orchard under the tree.
Yeah, they're walking through an apple orchard and she gives him a gift, or was it him giving her a gift?
No, she gave it to him.
A necklace with a medallion on which is inscribed, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life.
Yes. And that kind of becomes his touchstone that he goes back to.
Because it mirrors, again, the heart is the wellspring of life. And so you've got this tangible medallion that talks about the heart being the wellspring of life. And then
he takes that very literally.
He takes it very literally because
this is what
her heart
causes her to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. It seems like a small thing. In fact, I wrote that down, but you can see it wound up being on the very last page because I wasn't sure at first that was really that important. But when you get to the end, though,
it becomes very important.
It becomes very important.
Yeah. That's like kind of his mantra or motto.
His mantra. Yeah.
Through life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right after that is where he takes them on their little boat ride. And that's also when Cindy meets Charlie for the first time, and he introduces Charlie as his brother-in-law, and she immediately, like, you have this moment of super tension where she's like, oh my gosh, you're married.
Yeah.
And then that's when he explains that his wife has passed away, but that Charlie will always be his brother-in-law. And I love, too, that, like, their houses are across from each other on the lake. Yeah. Did you catch that? That, like, they have guide wires under the water.
I know.
So that Charlie can swim back and forth between their docks.
Yeah.
I don't know how realistic that is.
I don't know how real, but it's a cool idea.
It's a nice idea, though.
Yeah.
I like it. And then we move into, like, an area where I think that next part is where Reese is talking about the human heart and how he kind of, like, has this revelation of how amazingly intricate it is, the way the Lord designed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was super cool. And how he calls it the unselfish organ.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a quote. It says, while it pumps more than 100,000 times a day without stopping, funneling hundreds of gallons of fluid around the body, it derives no benefit from the blood that it pumps.
Mm-hmm. It's just doing a job.
It's just doing its job, you know, and it's there to kind of make sure everything else can function. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he also kind of explains more about Emma's condition, how, like, that hole in her heart. Typically, when children are born with a hole in their heart, that everybody is born with this hole.
Yes.
It's what, because as he explains it several times, the mother, all of our needs, like, our heart doesn't have to pump blood while we're in utero because our mother is giving us our blood through the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
So there is that hole between the chambers that allows it to function that way while we're in utero. but then after birth, there's those chemicals released in the body
prostaglandin
that cause it to close.
Yes.
And
see, this again shows the miraculous nature of our bodies.
Yes.
The minute you're born,
it starts closing
that I think it's called prostaglandin.
Yes.
That prostaglandin releases, and it starts the process of that hole closing
that hole up, so that your heart can then function outside of the womb.
That's miraculous.
It is, and you'll never again. It goes back to, you can never convince me that there's not an intelligent creator responsible for all of this.
No, there has to be.
And I think even once we get to heaven, because it says we'll have perfect knowledge then.
Yes.
Can you, I think we'll be blown away at how intelligent the design is. Of creation.
Think about it. They say statistically, even the most intelligent person in the world, they only use 10% of their brain,
something like
a very small.
I'm using a teeny tiny portion of mine.
Me too, because I'm about as dumb as a box of rocks.
You are not.
And I think that's what is it Paul that says we're basically looking through a smoke-colored glass right now.
That we can't see clearly.
We can't see clearly, but then one day when we see God face to face, everything will be known.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So Annie falls asleep on the boat. They go back home. He takes them home on the boat, and Cindy offers him some tea. And that's when I love this moment because it reminded me of Mama Michelle. She cuts her finger cutting the lemon and almost passes out. Did you know that my Mama Michelle is she cannot handle the sight of blood?
I did not know that.
She absolutely cannot. So, and I kind of have a story that mimics this. When our first Christmas that we were married, my grandparents lived in Wilburton. And so we drove down to Wilburton to have Christmas with the whole family. Dad and Michelle were there. The girls were young, Morgan and Michaela, I think would have been in 4th grade. So they were young. And so they were there, and all my sisters had come in with their significant others. And so we're at Grammy's house and we're finishing up the Christmas meal, and I was helping her peel potatoes. And she tells me, be very careful. I just got new knives and they're super sharp. They were those Rada knives. Rada cutlery.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, be very careful. I just got new knives and they're very, very sharp. And I was like, I've been peeling potatoes since I was, knee high to a grasshopper. I can do this.
Yeah.
So I'm over there at the sink peeling potatoes, and Michelle's in the kitchen with me doing something else, and we're cooking. And I'll tell you what, Brett, I sliced right through that potato into my hand. And you can see the scar here, from here to here.
Oh my goodness.
I just sliced right into that soft part of my hand.
That's flesh, yeah.
And I didn't even think, I just immediately turned to Mom Michelle and I was like, Mom. And I did not know that she was so sensitive to the sight of blood. Because Mom and Dad had only been married for a little while at that point.
Yeah.
Maybe a year. And I had already moved out of the house at that point. So I wasn't with her all the time. And so I didn't know that she had that sensitivity. So I turned to her thinking, okay, I need your help. And when I turned, she catches sight of the blood. She immediately goes white and almost hit the floor.
Oh my.
She was this close to passing out. And she just turns and she says, you've got to get your dad. I can't deal with this. And takes off to the bathroom. And I hear her in there getting sick.
Oh my good. Bless her heart.
So then my dad ended up having to Dad and Cody took me to the emergency room and I had to get stitches. It's the first stitches I ever had in my whole life.
Oh, wow.
And I was 19. It was crazy. But that reminded me of that section where Cindy almost passes out, and he has to sew her up. And that's when we also realize oh, he's something special.
Yes.
Because his stitches are super fine. And it talks about that, how she's that's some really fancy stitching.
The typical person wouldn't be comfortable
stitching somebody up on their couch. Yeah. And how he just has it in his little tool pocket or whatever. He has the monofilament or whatever is what they call it. That's the kind that doctors use.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole getting into the crux of who Reese is, it's very piecemeal.
Yes.
You don't get to know him.
Little teensy pieces.
Yeah. You don't get to know him in one fell swoop.
No.
It's literally, you don't know the totality of Reese until you've turned the last page.
Yeah. You basically get some time. Yes, really.
Yeah.
Which I kind of liked. It kept me wanting more.
Exactly. Yeah.
I keep wanting to read because now I want to know more.
Yeah.
So after that is when she asked them to take him to Atlanta for Annie's doctor's appointment, and we learn that Dr. Royer is her surgeon, and he gets visibly uncomfortable, but he agrees to take him.
Yeah.
And then the next section is where they're in college, and he talks about how Emma was pretty stable through that. She was she wasn't really focused on graduating so much, but she just kind of seemed to be at ease, and her condition was somewhat.
It was kind of a quiet time in her life.
Thanks for joining us on the Bookish Introverts podcast, where together we explore the worlds within the pages. Until next time, stay bookish.